Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is our first webinar of 4 webinars. We're glad to be joined today by 3 of UMMA's founders and to really have a rich conversation about UMMA's history. Many of you have probably known about UMMA's history over the years and have interacted with either a board member or one of the UMMA founders. And we wanted to really, during this time of Ramadan and times of reflection, really talk about UMMA's story and how it began and what's come out of it. Just a quick update, we've been really busy here at UMMA, and inshallah on Friday, we'll be providing a more detailed response to what we're doing on the front lines in our response to COVID and our work in the community. But today we want to take a step back, and we're really fortunate to have with us 3 folks who have been involved since UMMA's inception and continue to be involved in UMMA's inception and have been really dedicated to UMMA's work at all levels. So we'll do a brief introduction and kind of jump into a conversation about UMMA's history, some of the early challenges, some gems of advice for you all who are maybe trying to balance, doing community work, balancing family life, trying to just figure out what you want to do, what passion you have. A lot of students, obviously, UMMA was a founded organization on the back and service of students, and what does that mean, and how does that continue to propel us forward? So with that, I'm really happy to introduce our first, guest for the evening, who's Dr. Nisha Abdul Qadir. She practices as a board-certified child abuse pediatrician in the County of San Luis Obispo, and is currently the medical school director for the Suspected Abuse Response Team and Child Advocacy Center, where she conducts medical forensic evaluations and provides expert testimony for court and collaborates with other teams to provide comprehensive care to child victims. Dr. Nisha Abdul Qadir supervises medical care at the county's Juvenile Service Center as well. She's a graduate of the Drew UCLA Medical Education Program and also completed her pediatric residency at Harbor UCLA. She has also experience in rural health as well, and she has been recognized for much of her work in terms of UMMA's formative years as well. So thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts here today. Also with us today is Dr. Altaf Qazi. He is a pediatrician by training and is his residency along with the chief resident at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. Currently, he's a pediatrician with Kaiser Permanente with over 20 years of experience residing in Orange County. He's also co-chair of the Child Abuse Committee for Kaiser Orange County, where he reviews all the child care abuse cases with a multidisciplinary team. And finally, we have Dr. Munaf Qadri, who is a double board certified in pediatrics and neonatology. He's currently a neonatologist and assistant professor at Loma Linda University Medical Center. He's published numerous works in his field in neonatology and continues to be an active member of UMMA's board of directors and serving on various committees, as is Dr. Altaf. Dr. Nisha has been involved as well, but has taken a different approach and has been one of the founders. But Dr. Munaf and Dr. Altaf continue to be involved actively in UMMA's board of directors. So with that, I want to just kind of start off with a question we get often from many students, from even funders, people who are supporters of UMMA, of really how did the idea of UMMA Clinic emerge? Was it folks just talking in a basement somewhere? Was it I've heard stories of chai somewhere, of tea, talking over discussions, but really, why UMMA and why then, and why, why this model of service to the community, given the context that you were in. So wanted to just kind of start off that way and see where, we can jump in.
So I'll go ahead and start. Assalamu alaikum. When I think of my experience with the beginning of UMMA, I'd like to say that we can look at it from the philosophical point of view as well as sort of my personal experience with that. And I believe when many of the students arrived at a campus such as UCLA, maybe they came from a place where there weren't very many Muslims. Maybe they came from a school, a high school where there weren't many Muslims. Maybe they'd see Muslims for events and things, but then they get to a big campus like UCLA or UCI or Berkeley, and all of a sudden they have this large group of support of peers that have gone through much of what they've gone through. And then all of a sudden you have this family that maybe you didn't have before. And being in that environment, it allows you to start really reflecting upon some of your your faith, you know, what can you do based on your faith? And I think when you go to those environments, and especially when we're talking about, you know, we're talking a quarter of a century ago, okay? So it was a while ago, but we looked at what are other communities doing, and you can see that other faith groups as well as other community groups were really already involved with these kind of programs. And so I think it was part of this, like, what can the Muslim community do? What can we do to put forward to serve our Muslim community, serve our youth, but also serve society at large? And so we could look at these other models that were already out there. And in particularly then from a more personal standpoint, early on in my first year of medical school with my husband, Rushdie Abdul Qadir, we had the experience of working at the Salvation Army Clinic, which was a very small, humble clinic, but provided an immense amount of service. And so it was something where we saw this model, and then we thought, well, how can we then use that model in this other realm, with Muslims being the backbone, but for something for the entire community. I do just want to add into, from a personal standpoint, at this point in time when we were talking about the start of the UMMA Clinic, I had been Muslim for less than a year. So I knew, okay, here, you know, I'm very basic with my knowledge of Islam, but here we have the 5 pillars. One of them is charity. How am I going to meet the pillar of charity? All I know is what you know, my passion in medical service. And so for me, it was very simplistic in that sense. Service and medicine, put it together, and this is how I can fulfill that one aspect of my faith requirement.
Great. Love to hear from Dr. Manaf and Dr. Altaf of your early recollections of other thoughts that came about, even from a personal experience of why maybe particularly you got involved, or why you thought the need was so important at that time.
I think the first thing I would like to add is that I was a classmate of Nisha and Rushdie's. And so I feel in many ways that that opportunity fell into my lap, and I'm very grateful to have been in that situation. And all of the student founders, those who are not even on the phone today, I'm very grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that opportunity to have that, to be blessed with that family at UCLA of Muslim students that Nisha is alluding to. And so that's the first thing I want to say. The things that I would add to what Nisha said is that I think her and Rushdie were really instrumental in wanting to serve the community, but being medical students, we wanted to do something from a health standpoint. And there were models like the Salvation Army Clinic and some inspirational attending physicians and faculty at UCLA who really inspired us, one of them being Dr. Richard Usatine. And we were at an institution on the west side of town that is a little bit more affluent, but right in our backyards in South LA, the need was tremendous. There, you know, at that time it was estimated that there was one physician for 10,000 residents, and in other parts of the town like Beverly Hills and the west side, you would have much better ratios, like one physician to 1,000 or 2,000 residents. So it was already an area in desperate need. And we as Muslims, we understood, as Nisha said, that one of the 5 pillars is charity, but we felt that we had not done as much as Muslims for our own neighbors in here in America, in our backyards. We were children of immigrants, and so there were a lot of examples of Muslims doing service to Muslims abroad and other parts of the world, which is very, very important. But at that time, in the early 1990s, there wasn't so much of an awareness for our obligation to serve our neighbors here. And we can look to numerous examples of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he served his neighbors, whether they were Muslim or not. And so this was an opportunity. And the only other thing I would add is that it started out, in all honesty, as something really small. I think we were envisioning a mobile trailer and doing health screenings and education. And then the civil unrest of 1992 happened in Los Angeles. And all of a sudden, a much greater opportunity fell into our laps by Allah's blessing.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was fortunate. I came on much later after Altaf and Rushdie and Nisha were involved. I think they had begun the legwork. And Altaf and I grew up together, and our family's always been close. And I remember Altaf telling me about it. And I came on right before we opened, and I kept hearing about all the things they were doing. And I thought it was a great cause, first of all, that, they motivated me more than anything because they were so driven. And I took the opportunity, and I thought, it's such a small thing. What are the chances it's going to succeed? It's not going to go anywhere, but it seems like a wonderful idea. And to help people, I got to join in for however long it lasts. Alhamdulillah. Who knew? But I always felt that it came from everyone's heart, that they were all determined to do this for the sake of Allah and the people around us.
One thing that comes up frequently when we discuss, even UMMA's history with funders and other community stakeholders is how multifaceted it was in terms of its collaborations, right? So student groups on campus at UCLA, with the late City Councilwoman Rita Walters, who passed recently as well, and all those important, I guess, discussions that happened with people who, weren't Muslim and folks that wanted to just help out a group of students basically at that time. So curious to, to hear from you all in terms of who are those kind of pillars in the community that really helped uplift and oftentimes, paved the way for UMMA to get started early on when some of the challenges really seemed insurmountable early, and, even to that end, if you want to talk about some of the challenges you faced early on and how you were able to persevere, I think there'd be a lot of lessons to be derived from that. So I'll open it up.
Well, I think what you're saying is very true, that you have to have certain connections. I mean, we have this group of students with goodwill and a lot of interest, but then you have to find those connections in the community, and you need to start to have some strategy. We were really fortunate, I believe, as Altaf mentioned, having Dr. Yusutin, who already worked in a clinic and was so very giving of his time and his effort. So we had one mentor right there. Then the other mentor who I think also came in and was extremely invaluable was Dr. Reed Tuckson, who was at that time the president of the Drew University. And he would always make time for students. And so Rushdie would often go in and just sit in his office and kind of pick his brain about things, about how would this be, how would you make this a reality? And in that process, I think it's really important for youth, we have so much motivation to do something, but to sit back and listen to what people who have experience and who have history, because if we don't know history, we're bound to repeat it. And so we can learn so much from the history of what other people have gone through. And so he was able to then put us in contact with people in the community, because it's not always easy to find that in a community where you want to go in and you want to provide a service and you want to be helpful, but we're not from that community. And he was able to give us those connections to make that communication and start to build that bridge between the Muslims from the UCLA campus and the people of the community, especially the ones that were doing nonprofit work. And I also want to say another important person that was just essential at that point in time, again, someone who has a lot of experience. And so once again, for youth, we can't overlook those people, is Sister Fatima. Sister Fatima had so much experience in grassroots efforts and organization, and she also gave so much time to us. So it's wasn't just looking for the doctors. The doctors were important and gave us health models, but then there were people in the community who fulfilled other areas that were so invaluable to understanding how does something set up in a community? How do you make those partnerships?
Absolutely true, Nisha. Sorry, my light just went out. It got dark in here. There, it's coming back on. UMMA's success would never have happened if not for collaboration. It's part of our intrinsic DNA, and I think even in our 20 years of growth, and although you can speak to now, we've continued that legacy of collaboration. And to the students who might be listening, if you have a big idea, you have to reach across different lines of faith, different ethnicities, and pull in people from the community, as Nisha mentioned. the students at UCLA, we had this grand idea on paper, but we had no resources, we had no funding. And so we formed a very unique three-way partnership between the Muslim students and student-based organizations at UCLA were also very supportive of us. So it was a partnership between the students, the universities, primarily UCLA, and Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science, and the city of Los Angeles. And as I mentioned earlier, the civil unrest unfolded and it presented this grand opportunity. And by these connections and the support of our faculty mentors, we eventually landed at the footsteps of the late Councilwoman Rita Walters in the 9th District. And I give a lot of credit to her along with the faculty mentors that Nisha already alluded to. In our very first meeting with her, she took us in almost a motherly way. And she pledged at the end of that meeting to find us a site. And I'm not sure what it was. Maybe we were naive students and that's what appealed to her. Maybe we came with no agenda, but we just had this idea on paper and the backing of the universities. And so she pledged to find us a site. And not only did she do that, but she made her staff available. People like John Shepard and Michelle Banks, Nisha's nodding because it's been 25 years, but those names are coming back. They not only helped us secure the site, but they helped us secure funding from the federal Housing and Urban Development Department that was earmarked for rebuilding Los Angeles. So they helped us secure a grant for over $700,000 to actually construct the clinic. And they donated a site that used to be an abandoned childcare facility. It was a real eyesore for the community, and we transformed it into this beautiful place of healing that has seen so many thousands of Angelinos over 20 years. So, I think in many ways, the UMMA Community Clinic is also a legacy of the late Councilwoman Rita Walters.
If I can just add on there too, I do really smile when I hear those names because you hear them and you just feel like what a relief those people gave you, what blessings they were to be brought into you. And that's in comparison. And I think this is what, when you talk about the challenges is when you're doing these type of efforts is to find those partners, but those partners that are reliable, that are trustworthy, because in this process you will meet some of those too that don't necessarily bring a smile to your face when you think of those situations so to navigate, as students, that was very challenging to navigate. Who's a reliable partner? Who are we going to invest our time and our money to build something, and then who's really is reliable and is going to see it through. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges we were facing as young students in the inception of this project.
I think that it's really important to have that collaboration. And like Altaf and Nisha are mentioning, it's not just about that you're a doctor, but you need the people who are in the community, who are veterans of the community, who can support you, like your deans or your health connection or your other clinics who support you. Because it's great to have this concept, I want to start something, but you need the support to go beyond. Anybody can open up a clinic on a weekend, but how do you sustain? How do you go from there? And I think that's probably the hardest part. But the other thing that the students had, that you guys had, was that it's nice to have the naivete to go and start something. Because if you sat there and made plans and you drew up plans and said, this is how much money I'm gonna need, this is what I'm gonna need, I can't do it, it's overwhelming. But to have that passion and that naiveness to say, I'm just gonna start in the name of Allah, and I'm just gonna go out there. I'll be organized, but I'll go out there and do it. Then the help comes your way. If you sit there and analyze and say, it's too much, I have to do this, I have to get this people involved, it's not gonna happen. But I think the fact that you're so driven that things just keep coming and helping from other sides, if students are watching, I'd say if you have a passion for doing something like that, I would say just do it and say Bismillah.
Yeah, and I think, that transition was,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say the transition was kind of to the next question. I think, a lot of students always ask, right, how do I find that passion? How do I cultivate it? And you guys gave good ideas. And I wanted to see for you back then, right, what did it mean to be a student, right? Balancing the normal studying, the tests, the exams, applying for medical school, which all three of you have, alhamdulillah, accomplished and are, examples in the community. but then like life at home, building a health institution. Like how did you find that balance, and what really helped to center you during those times you're like, what am I doing? Not only do I have to only be a student, but then I have to go above and beyond, and I want to see this project through. So what did it mean to you, and what advice do you have for students who are amongst this situation, right? So I think a lot of students are staying home now amongst the COVID-19 situation. A lot of their plans might have shifted, right? They might have been trying to apply to medical school, or trying to get into just a good undergraduate program, or their whole life is turned upside down. This is one of those cataclysmic moments that's really tipping points of sorts in terms of the life trajectory of many students and families across the United States, and specifically in the Muslim community. So what advice do you have for that Muslim student who has aspirations in terms of trying to find a project or a passion that they can get behind in that balance or semblance of balance that they can create?
Well, I think part of the project was a lot of fun. So I think getting together with our friends and our peers, it was actually a lot of fun. So it was something that always drove us on, was being together, the companionship that we had in this process, especially when you have a companionship of moving forward on something so idealistic, at the same time working through the drudgery of medical school at some time. So I think that it really balanced our experience out. It did take sacrifice. Without a doubt. There were times when each of us sacrificed things we should have probably been doing, but we did something for the clinic instead. And I would say that Rushdie did more of that than anybody, but then I think Altaf was there to help him through a little bit too, when he needed that little backup there. So thank you, Altaf, for helping him out there. I think when I look back, like you're saying, how do you develop that? As high school students and undergraduates, we're told to do a lot of volunteer work now. And what is important, I think, is to make those volunteer efforts matter. Make those volunteer efforts something that you enjoy doing, but it's also taking you along a path where you want to go. And so when I think about what did I do as an undergraduate, I went to Southern Mexico for 6 months, and I worked in a clinic. And so my Spanish became very strong working in that environment. And I started to learn what, like you said, rural health issues, how are medical systems in other countries. And I think I was able to bring that back, and you could see then, wow, it doesn't take that much to start a clinic. You can really run a clinic on the minimal of supplies and with people who are dedicated to the effort. And so what I would really say is to students right now, whether you're in high school or whether you're in an undergraduate, really make your volunteer efforts count to something that you are really interested in, that you're going to enjoy doing, and it's going to take you along the path that you'd like to go. You're not just ticking a box. It's something that you're getting a skill that's going to move you forward. I know with Rushdie, with his work as an undergraduate, with so many Muslim programs on campus, those were his other ways of, they weren't in the medical field at that point in time, but there were things about collaborating, starting to understand how systems in the universities work. Right now, this is a great time, although you may not be able to have hands-on effort in something, it's a great time to take classes online and figure out other ways. How can you do a volunteer effort that's going to actually give you some really good skills, whether it's a class or volunteering, that will keep you going forward on your path, even in this time where you're kind of locked down at home.
Munaf mentioned something about passion, and I think all of us would be remiss if we did not recognize the passion that Rushdie brought to the table. He was, I think, the single most passionate person that I give most of the credit to. He helped garner over $150,000 worth of supplies and furniture, and to actually open the clinic and operationalize it. I remember we were classmates together, so I remember going on rotation where we were supposed to be reporting to a hospital, but to be doing clinic rotations, and he would sidetrack us to go check out tile to pick up for the clinic. And so I know Nisha has a hard time reining in that passion even right now, but I matured more in terms of that path of service, I think, when I came to UCLA, and I was blessed to be around some people that I consider pioneers in starting a lot of student organizations at UCLA, such as Al-Talib and the Incarcerated Youth Tutorial Project. These were people who are now at the level of medical school or graduate school. When I look at Mansour Khan, Khalik Siddiq, Rushdie, and they already had this sort of grassroots experience of networking with other student-based and faith-based organizations. And so for me, I really kind of fed off of that passion. The other thing in terms of balancing everything, the UMMA Clinic was a very unique project where I think different individuals stepped up at different times and kind of ran with it. Rushdie had that expertise of being able to garner support by just cold calling people. He has a gift for it, and he helped us really build in that capacity. Mansour, I probably credit a lot more with reaching out to the various elected officials and getting the support of the city of Los Angeles. When we finally got a site, my father, my late father who's passed away, was the architect that did the initial design for the clinic. And I think we all owe a lot to our parents in this process, because they were very patient with us. As Munaf mentioned, this seemed like a crazy idea at one time, but literally our parents said, "Are you serious? You guys are going to start a free clinic?" And we had like no money and no resources other than approaching organizations and trying to get support. And I think Rushdie's parents stored tile and all sorts of furniture in their garage for a few years until the clinic actually opened. So I give a lot of credit to our parents for being supportive and patient with us. And Nisha, as Nisha mentioned, it was, as busy as medical school was, this was another outlet that became really fun, and we formed a very close bond. And to this day, all of us student founders are very closely knit, and our children are now very, our friends, and we are able to go visit San Luis Obispo as a group. And so, something really good came out of it in terms of the UMMA Community Clinic and service to the residents of Los Angeles, but I feel it also enriched my life tremendously on a personal level.
I can say that I was moved by all the people who were doing the right things to create an UMMA clinic. I remember, obviously Rushdie is the engine that can and could, and he still keeps going. I know that, mashallah. And Altaf and Mansour and Khalik and Rumi and everyone else. And I remember having a board meeting at Nisha and Rushdie's apartment, and that was like, I think, one of our first board meetings. And I was just moved by all the passion that went into it, to how to sustain a clinic. I mean, I think we all knew that clinics used to open on the weekends at different places, and then they would close up after that. But I think passion is important, because passion drives you to do things. And I think we mentioned that, having that collaboration, having the right group of people. And it's hard. Like, I remember as an undergrad, I did several things to check the boxes of, oh, I have to volunteer, or I have to do this, I have to do that. I'm sure it helped me in some ways that I can't eloquently state, but I know that it helped me overall, until my true passion it didn't come until later. It was UMMA Clinic, and it remains, alhamdulillah, still my passion and the number one thing. So I think that it's nice, it's hard sometimes, but you have to cultivate or try to go look for that passion. What drives you? What am I going to get some pleasure out of it? Am I going to get spirituality out of helping others in whatever way I can? And it doesn't have to be a clinic. It can be many ways. You can be an attorney, you can be a businessman, you can be a plumber, whatever have you, electrician, that you can still go out and create that and help others.
Yeah, and I think that's some wonderful advice. And I think, what's the question I always get asked, and I think some of you might as well, and maybe in the early stages of UMMA, was one, I thought you only served Muslim community members, or I thought it was just for Muslims. And second is, I thought your staff is also all just Muslim. And those two are further from the truth. Our staff is very diverse as we've grown. Today we have, alhamdulillah, 70 full-time staff members who come from various different backgrounds. Our chief medical officers, part of the Jewish tradition as well. And so it's just so unique to have something as UMMA kind of thrive, given when all the circumstances perhaps around them didn't do that. So question for you all is, what part of your, your identity as a Muslim was important, right? So why was it important that it was the Ummah clinic, right? Because many faith organizations can go different routes, because you have so many different partners that are, helping you. As you said, you talked to so many different people, and it could have just been another community clinic, right? In on Florence and Hoover. Why particularly, why was the Muslim identity piece of it so important to you all? Because there's examples of students being well-meaning and taking on, a life of its own and creating an organization that's maybe, outside of a faith tradition, right? So what was particularly important even during that time for you around your Muslim identity, and what lessons have you carried with yourselves from that point forward? And why was, Ummah's identity being tied to a Muslim-founded institution so important for you all as you were negotiating some of these ideas of what this clinic might be early on? Not all at once. I know it's a question.
Sorry, I was waiting for Nisha, that's why.
Okay.
We're gonna go first.
Well, no, she just sets us up so well that I just wanted her to speak first, that's why.
Well, I'll just say that, as I was saying before, I was a new Muslim, and what I was learning about Islam was so beautiful. And I felt that this is my personal story about this, was that I felt that there was so much misunderstanding about what Islam truly is. I grew up with people around me not understanding it, or having some kind of negative interaction, and that influencing them in so many different ways. And so for me, the opportunity to put Islam out there as what it truly is, as a faith of service, a faith of belief, a faith of consistency, and the ability to not be insular, to be inviting of other people. I thought that was very important, that this opportunity could lend itself to this. And then by having the other Muslims that were interested in starting this program also having that similar drive, that yes, this could represent us, and it should. We had a very strong movement forward with that, such that people that were not Muslim felt very comfortable joining us, even if it were a Muslim organization, even though there were Muslims who were starting it and driving it, because we were so inviting, but yet we were so firm in our convictions of this being something that reflects, to the best of our ability, the Islam that we understood. Where none of us were scholars, we were just trying to live this as best as we could. That's what I thought was a lot of the driving force.
I think for me, it just seemed very natural that Islam calls us to serve humanity in general, irrespective of faith. And I think for all of the student founders, it was that point that you made, although that you get asked, did we start to serve Muslims? And in fact, 98% of our patients are non-Muslim. That was very important to the founders from its inception. It was very important to just go out there and serve. And there was a tremendous need. South Los Angeles, could be argued at that time, was one of the most impoverished communities in the United States in terms of inner cities, in terms of being underserved in many ways, not just health, but economic and social disparities. And I think, the riots, the flashpoint was the verdict of the acquittal of the LAPD officers in the beating of Rodney King. But in many ways, it was the tipping point of, this injustice that had already been brewing for so many years. There was the Watts riots in 1966, and did a lot change for people of color, did a lot change for people who are underserved. And is it our calling as Muslims to try to speak up for injustice and try to correct wrongs that we see? And I was blessed to be with fellow Muslim students, not just in medical school. Some of the student founders came from public health, some were undergrads at that time, but we shared this common vision. And we, it's cliche to say put your faith into action, but it really was an opportunity for us to live, to implement something that was really consistent with our teachings of our Prophet Muhammad. And so it was a great opportunity. It was very important for us to maintain that Muslim identity because it, as Nisha said, it counterbalanced some of the negative sentiments, and we didn't really have to tell people what Islam stood for and what Islam, or defend Islam in any way. They just had to look at the Ummah Clinic. And I think Imam Zaid Shakir said this also at one of our fundraisers, that, you know, people think that maybe the Ummah Community Clinic was a reaction to 9/11. No, it was there 5 years before 9/11, serving the residents of South Los Angeles. I already built trust in that community. Sure, after 9/11, Ummah Clinic became an example of what Islam really stands for, but we didn't have to say anything to make that point. It was self-evident from the service that we provided to the residents of South Los Angeles. And so in that vein, it's been very important for the founders, even though Ummah has evolved, become an FQHC, is adding additional sites, but to maintain that Islamic identity as the founding principles of what started this institution is very important. But we are more than collaborative and reaching across all different lines of faith in terms of the staff we have, in terms of the collaborations we've built through the years. And so that's why for me, the Ummah Clinic, you know, I feel grateful that this has been an example, an opportunity for me to really serve humanity and do what my religion commands me to do.
There's a hadith of the saying of the Prophet, and I'm going to paraphrase it and correct me if I'm wrong. Excuse me. If you see some injustice, something being done wrong, make a change with your hands. If you can't make a change with your hands, and speak about it. If you can't do it, then at least acknowledge it in your heart that it's wrong. And I think that for me, the Ummah Clinic was to make a change with my hand. And you can call it wrong, any kind of injustice, meaning people are troubled, people are not doing well, healthcare is not provided. This is pre-Obama care, ACA care, all those things. That we did something for the people in that community because we made something change with our own hands. I think Ummah allows me to get a passion for something that I didn't have before, and also increases my faith and iman in Islam and being Muslim, that now I'm actually, instead of just talking about it, I'm actually trying to do something with my own hands and actually serving human beings, my neighbors who may not be Muslims and may be Muslims. But that allows me to show my faith, that this is what my faith represents. And I think it's made my faith stronger.
And I think, you know, over the years, you know, it's interesting, and I wonder if any of you at that point understood that this is the first pioneering Muslim medical institution, right? We talk about the Cedar Sinai, the St. Francis, St. Joseph's health systems. I mean, up until this point, right, American Muslim physicians, you guys are perfect examples, you know, make up 0.5% of, you know, close to all the physicians in the United States at some level. And yet we're, you know, representative of about 0.3% of the entire population. And so being so pioneering early on, I think, you know, given that you all have transitioned into medical careers from the work that you did at Ummah, I'm curious to know maybe from each of you 2 lessons that you took from your work at Ummah, you know, whichever, you know, point of involvement it came in. I know, you know, on and off on the board of directors, you know, serving in different capacities with fundraising and outreaching in the community. What are 2 lessons that you kind of carry with you, you know, frequently or every day, even perhaps, that you're reminded of when you either hear about Ummah Clinic or you maybe remember the time that, you know, you went through, you know, Ummah Clinic's early stages? What are 2 lessons that have kind of stayed with you throughout your life, even until today, from your involvement at Ummah?
Well, on a very practical level, I have to say that I learned through the process of being part of the development of the Ummah Clinic, was that you're going to meet assets along the way every day. And so seize those opportunities, whether it's a person that you can ask about some bit of knowledge. What do they know about starting a clinic? What do they know about, you know, fundraising? What do they know about acquiring goods or supplies? Or just people that have then connections to other people. So along the way, you're going to, you know, we all meet people that can be such strong assets in our life that it's not to be doing something that we're trying to get something out of somebody, but it's just to understand when you meet people, they have knowledge, they have experience, they have wisdoms that you can tap into. And so to take that time to talk to people and make those connections, I think is really important. You know, I wouldn't have thought of this as a lesson, but until right now, as I'm reflecting upon it and reflecting upon the last topic we were discussing, you know, why was it so important that that the UMMA clinic was based in Islam? And that is that Islam is timeless. We will come and go. You know, Los Angeles will change. Political seasons will change. Ideas will change. But Islam is timeless. And so the ideals that were 25 years ago when it started are the same ideals now, which can continue to be the same ideals into the future. And what we really need to think about too is how do we make sure that we are helping to develop that next generation that will see that timelessness of Islam and continue it forward when the rest of us aren't here anymore, both from this clinical standpoint of the UMMA clinic as well as in our community in general. So I think that's something that I've realized now in retrospect, and I appreciate that. I'm grateful for that.
I think in terms of the lessons, I'm just trying to reflect. There have been so many wonderful things that have come as a result of UMMA. I think one of the things that I really learned is really how to build collaborative relationships for the common good. And so as an example, you know, UMMA started in 1996. We opened our doors and I joined Kaiser Permanente in 1999. I had no idea that we would develop such a strong relationship with my employer. And, you know, shortly into my career at Kaiser, I learned that they have a community benefits funding program. And so I presented the UMMA clinic idea to Kaiser Permanente, and they knew very well that it was a Muslim initiated project. But through the years, we've been able to build a very strong collaborative relationship, even to the point where UMMA was recognized with a national award. And we had the opportunity to present the project to the National Board of Directors in Kaiser Permanente. And so I've learned that even if it's a Muslim project, that if you're out there to just serve your fellow human beings and you have a good cause, that others will join and support you. And I've been very grateful to be working for an employer that has been so supportive of the UMMA Clinic project through the years. Another, I think, just tangible personal thing that UMMA helped create an interest for me was medical education. And I give a lot of credit to that to Rumi and Rushdie in the early years of making UMMA a site for medical students to rotate through. Coming out of medical school myself and just being out of practice, out of residency for a few years, Munaf and I used to precept in the pediatric clinic on Saturdays with Dr. Glenda Lindsay. And that was my first dabbling at being on the other side of the education pendulum, not as a student, but as a preceptor, attending physician. And so through my years in Kaiser, I've been able to continue that to some capacity. And I credit UMMA for giving me that opportunity. And as Nisha alluded to, it's an opportunity to also train a future generation of physicians and also expose them to the realities of community medicine that may be different from the academic institutions that we train at.
I think that's, you know, UMMA taught me is that you have a lot to learn from everyone else. I don't know everything running the clinic, or I didn't, and we have people who are helping us do that. The knowledge of different things that go into to having a clinic succeed, or at some point I was also chair of the board, and I was It was very difficult. I mean, I think it's a lot of people talk about skill sets, and different people have that, and you have to take that and appreciate that. Those are the things that it makes you humble a lot. We had a great CEO in Yasser Rahman, who pretty much ran everything, and I think I learned a lot from him, or just being around Ummah. And the biggest part for us was education. We always wanted to train the up and coming generation, and education works both ways. When you educate someone, you learn also yourself. And I think that was the most challenging and enjoyable aspect of it was, you know, how are we going to make it to the Pete's clinic on Saturday or the weekend, whatever it is. If either Altaf doesn't make it or I don't make it, then it's going to close, and we're not going to be able to see patients. So it lends you to a greater responsibility and makes you to really figure out and coordinate, and makes you more responsible than you would have been in other ways.
Yeah, and I know there's been so many lessons, and I think the history of Ummah is so rich, and I think, you know, we talked about, and perhaps in the coming years to either have some of you or all of you participate in a book or some type of documentary to really go into the details, because it's a story that can be told from different angles, and I think has so many lessons to be learned from every day. And so I want to thank you all for joining and for starting this Sadaqah Jariyah, inshallah, for yourselves and your families that will outlast us. And I think it's truly been an honor to serve in this capacity that I have going on close to 7 and 8 years now with UMMA Clinic, in the last 30 years as CEO here. But it's truly been, you know, a miracle to witness, honestly, when we face certain challenges that I think typical organizations would face, and you think you would fold. But for us to be able to continue to push forward with the dedication and the selfless sacrifices that many of you made early on. And I think when we share that with our staff, and many of our staff who say, you know, I heard about Islam, you know, I understand Muslims a little bit, but I didn't really understand Islam until I walked into the door and, you know, worked at UMMA Clinic in terms of how I'm treated, what you all do for us. We have staff members who started working because their family was getting treated at UMMA. We've been reflecting for the last few years on what it means to treat one family of 4 generations at UMMA, who choose to not only have one of their family members work at UMMA, but then also get treatment for themselves or family members, you know, in generations, in waves. And so, alhamdulillah, I think that's a blessing. And as we continue to institutionalize the work and showcase the work of Americans, Muslims in America, through collaborative efforts, I think UMMA clinics tend to stand out. Thank you all for joining us. Want to just urge everyone to go on to our website. We have a COVID-19 emergency appeal going on. We'll be going into details in terms of what we're doing in one of the first Muslim institutions on the first responder line of really dealing with COVID-19 patients, triaging patients, but then also continuing the daily work that we're doing on the ground in the community. And next week we have a talk with Sheikh Sohail Mullah, who has joined our Islamic Identity Committee as a counsel, who's helped to guide us in different paths, because in terms of questions that come up in terms of our Islamic identity as an organization. He was actually also a social worker at Fremont High School, where we have one of our clinics. So he'll be sharing some of his perspective of working in South LA and now being involved at this level. But want to thank you all for joining us, inshallah, and we wish Ramadan Mubarak and continued prosperous Ramadan to you all. And definitely ask you to get involved in Ummah, volunteer, obviously donate your time, donate any resources you have. You have such a rich history, and we want to continue building and showcasing what American Muslims are doing in the United States. So thank you for joining, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for letting us be a part of this today.
Assalamu alaikum.